Hey guys, welcome to the 8 Limbs of Yoga. Hope you enjoy this video where we go on a journey exploring a philosophy that's been around for almost 2,000 years. Hello, Be Ultimate podcasters. Thank you for joining me for another episode where we explore all things yoga, meditation, and personal development. These last few weeks has just been a flurry of travel and activity. One weekend I was at the Mammoth Yoga Festival teaching a couple classes a day. The next weekend, I was co-leading a training actually on advanced sequencing with my wife, Lauren, where we spent 4 days, 10 hours a day, just teaching people how to sequence yoga classes in a way that's powerful and thematic and potentially life-changing. And then I just got back a couple days ago from another advanced training where we did a deep dive into Ayurveda. And if you haven't listened to the episode here on the Be Ultimate podcast about Ayurveda, go back and check that out. But Ayurveda is really the sister science to yoga. And the word Ayurveda means the science of life, sometimes known as the science of the longevity of life. So I'm back in Los Angeles for a few days, July 4th, right around the corner. And then in 4 or 5 days, I'm off to do a silent meditation retreat for 14 days. So I'm really excited about that because it's been a busy year. And I could really use some time to go on a retreat, get still, be silent. These meditation retreats are just a powerful way for me to nourish and to have solitude and to really just go inwardly and have a break, have a break from the busyness of life and the stimulation of the world. So on this episode, we're going to be exploring something that I've really been studying and also teaching now for over a decade, and this is yoga philosophy at its finest. And this is based off what we call the 8 limbs of yoga. So a lot of times in this modern day era of yoga, when we think about this word yoga, we often think about yoga poses or yoga postures. And I was the exact same way. If somebody mentioned the word yoga before I'd been to a yoga class, for me, I would think of an image of somebody bent up in a pretzel position. Somebody, sticking their leg behind their head or balancing upside down in some sort of a headstand or handstand. And unfortunately, a lot of us think that that's what yoga is. But nearly 2,000 years ago, there was a sage, a wise man known as Patanjali. And Patanjali systemized these teachings of yoga into what's now known as the 8 limbs of yoga, sometimes known as Ashtanga. So Ash means 8 and Anga means limb, so the 8-limb path. And just so you know, there are 2 different Ashtangas. There's an Ashtanga yoga that's a very physically dynamic practice developed by a yogi guru named Pattabhi Jois. This is different. This is the original Ashtanga yoga developed by Patanjali. But essentially, this 8 limbs of yoga was really meant to be a path or a science to awakening or enlightenment. The awakening is awakening or turning the light on that there is a reality that's much more real and deep and true than what it is that the 5 senses are reporting to us. We know that the 5 senses are very limited as to how much data that they're able to pass on to our brain and to our mind. So the goal of yoga, the goal of the 8 limbs of yoga, is to really help us to transcend the 5 senses and to move beyond the ego. And the ego is this part of us that's not always bad. We need an ego to survive in this world of duality, in this world of Newtonian physics. But also the ego can become a cage and become a prison that really enslaves us and imprisons us into this little tiny box where we exist within these small labels, this small identity, thoughts, old stories, limiting beliefs, etc., etc. So the yogis, they were really considered to be the scientists of their day. They looked at yoga as a science where they would conduct these experiments, and from the experiment they would have an experience. And from that experience, this direct knowing, not just theory or reading about it or talking about it, but really experiencing it, that's where the wisdom and the teachings would come from. So they were exploring the science of the mind. And generation to generation, from guru to student, from teacher to disciple, this information was passed on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And eventually it was crafted into this subject of the 8 limbs of yoga. The Persian poet Rumi writes, "The second you stepped into this world of existence, a ladder was placed before you to help you escape it." So again, this notion that we live in this world where we can often get bogged down and we can buy into this maya, or this illusion of separateness, that we're separate from all things. And this philosophy, this science, this practice of 8 limbs of yoga helps us to rise beyond that world of maya and illusion so that we really have this perspective of knowing what's really going on. So in some ways, I like to look at the 8 limbs of yoga as if, kind of like Led Zeppelin described the stairway to heaven, like you're going up a staircase. And on the flip side of a stairway to heaven, we can also go down a stairway to hell, but that's a whole other topic and a whole other discussion. Let's talk about ascending and rising and climbing instead of going into the downward spiral of suffering, misery, and hell. So we'll start off at that first step, that first limb, which is known as Yama, Y-A-M-A. Yama, I like to look at the awakened qualities. These awakened qualities are really the ethics of how yoga is practiced off our yoga mat, off our meditation cushion, and how we relate to other people. How we relate to this external world. So there's 5 yamas. The first yama is what's known as ahimsa. And ahimsa means non-violence. Now I like to take what's stated as a negative, non-violence, and spin that into a positive. So the opposite of non-violence really becomes peacefulness. And this notion of peacefulness really relates to being peaceful, not just within our actions and our behavior, but also within the words that we use and the speech that we choose to express. And it goes even deeper than that, and that has to deal with being peaceful within our mind and within our thoughts. So you may be really good at not going around the world in your community and attacking people and hitting people, hopefully. And, maybe on the speech and the word level, most of the time you're using words that are peaceful and not violent. But the challenging thing, especially as we go deeper and deeper into this, and I feel this way myself, is really being peaceful within our thoughts. You could be in traffic and somebody cuts you off, And inside your head, you're just flipping into rage and violence and cursing. And this includes really eradicating that violence even out of the mind. So it's a practice, and yoga is not about perfecting yourself. It's really about perfecting your ability to be compassionate and loving with yourself and others. And look, the reality is we're human, right? And humans have imperfection woven into who we are. So sometimes we're going to get derailed. And when we get derailed, it's okay. We just don't want to get derailed for days and days and days. We get derailed as we move down this practice less and less and less. So maybe we get upset in that little road rage incident, but instead of it lasting, hours, it starts to last minutes and eventually seconds. And so that's the direction that we're really moving towards. The second yama is what's known as Satya, and Satya is the word for truth. So this energy of being truthful and being honest. Somebody wise once said that honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom. So if we want to be wise, then we have to stay away from the lies. So we want to be honest. And what happens is when we violate Satya, when we violate truthfulness, we begin to create this hall of mirrors effect. So if you've ever been to the carnival or the fair, they have the hall of mirrors section, and you go in there and these mirrors everywhere, and you see thousands of images of yourself in all these different ways being depicted. Some are very skinny, some are very large. And this is what happens when we start lying. We don't know what truth is. So when they say, let truth set you free, it's really speaking to this notion of setting you free from these false illusions of the nature of reality. So you pull away those lies, you become wise, and then you stand on this solid, strong bedrock of truth where there's no hiding behind anything. Because everything you say is aligned with truth. The third yama is known as asteya, and asteya means non-stealing. So again, if we spin the negative of non-stealing into the positive, the opposite of stealing something would be to give something. So this is the quality of generosity. The more you give, the more you receive. And we know through amazing meditation practices like loving kindness, metta meditation, when we send these benevolent phrases to another human being or a group of other people, not only do they benefit from that, but we benefit as well. That neuroscience shows certain areas in our brain that are associated with stress in the amygdala region, that those areas actually shrink in physical size. And then other areas of our brain that are associated with health and well-being, we lay down more gray matter in those areas. So those areas of the brain become more reinforced and more strengthened. So the things that you feed, you strengthen. The things that you starve and you deplete, you weaken. You are what you repeatedly do, as Aristotle said. Therefore, a habit, an excellence, is related to these habits that we create within our lives. So the spirit of generosity, of being giving. And when we're giving, we're going to be happier. We're going to be in a state of joy. In fact, a lot of times people that are really depressed, it's because they're stuck in this prison where they're just bathing in all this ego, and all the attention is just on themselves, and they're focusing on this suffering, and they're magnifying more and more suffering and more misery. And if they can take the attention off of themselves and put it onto another human being or an animal or a cause outside of themselves, that can be one of the most therapeutic healing modalities to helping us transcend depression. So when you're feeling depressed, the last thing that you want to do is hole up inside your house and do a marathon of Netflix or Hulu or whatever it is, chances are at the end of that, you're just going to feel even more depressed. So get out of your house, go out there, focus on other people, focus on giving back, and be in that spirit of generosity. The fourth yama is brahmacharya, and brahmacharya has to do with celibacy. So that's really about being mindful of how we work with our sexual energy. And back in the day, and still to this day, if you're a monk or you're a nun, or even on this meditation retreat that I'm about to go on for 2 weeks, you take a vow of celibacy, which is to refrain from all sexual activity. And the idea is that sexual energy is the strongest, most powerful energy that exists within us. And if we can harness that, we can use that to really help us awaken. But also this energy being so powerful can become incredibly destructive, and it can cause a lot of suffering to ourselves and to other people when it's misused. So a monk may refrain completely from sexual activity, but those of us that live in this modern day world, what this really means is just using that energy of sexuality in a way that is positive and pure for yourself and whoever it is that you're sharing this level of intimacy with. And then number 5 of the yamas is apatigraha. And apatigraha means non-grasping. If we spin non-grasping into a positive, the opposite of grasping and holding and clinging, you do that because you feel like if you don't have that you're not going to be enough, and that you're not going to be enough. So the opposite really is abundance. Being in this energy of abundance, that you don't have to grasp and you don't have to cling, that you are enough and that you have enough. To feel abundant, to pay attention to all the abundance that exists within your life. But a lot of us, we grasp, we try and hold on to people that we're in relationship with. We don't want them to change. And so we can become incredibly stifling to another. A parent can do that to a child. A wife could do that to a husband, or vice versa. A boss could do that to a coworker, that, this coworker is on this path where they have a lot of talent and skill and inspiration, and people can feel threatened by that. And then they try and keep them inside of a box. And then that backfires. So to let go to the natural flow. Let go to the natural flow of the nature and the universe. And that the reality is that we live in this world full of loss and gain. Sometimes we're going to lose something. We're going to lose people. People are going to die. You're going to die. I'm going to die. That death is also something we have to surrender to. And on the flip side of loss is gain. Sometimes we're going to gain. We're going to gain more money. We're going to gain more power. We're going to gain more attention. But it's not going to last forever. At some point, what goes up must come down. So life is full of these highs and these lows, or what's known as the vicissitudes. And when we live by these ethics of the yamas, we move through the vicissitudes of life with more evenness and steadiness and equanimity. So those are the 5 yamas: peacefulness, truthfulness, generosity, celibacy, and abundance. That's the first limb. Now let's move to the second limb. The second limb is known as the niyamas. And the niyamas translate, for me at least, into the codes of noble living. The yamas have more to do with how we deal with others, and the niyamas are more qualities of how we can work within our own practices, our own life, and also our own self. So the first of the niyama is known as Saatchi, and Saatchi means cleanliness. And there's a big like popularity right now of, going in, cleaning out the clutter. I've been talking about this for years, but now you have TV shows, where people go in and they're learning how to clear the clutter out of their closets and out of their house, and the amazing effect that that has. So we're talking about being clean within the spaces that we live in and that we move through on a daily basis. This includes your home. This includes your car, your vehicle. This includes your office. This includes your garage. This includes your closet. This includes all those different areas. And to be clean, the more clutter that you accumulate, that has a psychic weight inside of your mind. It's going to affect your mental space in addition to your external space. In addition to being clean within our spaces, we also need to think about being clean within our physical space, our body space. That in many of the spiritual traditions, they look at the body as if it's a temple, and we need to treat it like a temple. Would you go and trash your church or a temple? So why would you trash the temple of your own body? Why would you put stuff into your body that's trash and harmful and not going to be supportive of your health? And the yogis, they would do a cleanse 4 times a year at the juncture of every season as a way to clean the body. So to detox the body. The second of the niyamas is known as santosha. And my wife Lauren and I used to have a lovely little fish, and he was the cutest little betta fish, and his name was Santosha, because Santosha means contentment. He, at least from our limited perspective, seemed like the very, very content little fish. He lived in his little fishbowl, and he just seemed very, very happy. Now, contentment to me is a little bit mundane, so I like to throw a little spice into that word of contentment, and I like to rev it up to a higher vibration known as gratitude. So gratitude, the attitude of gratitude, is, as the quote you may have heard me say on other podcasts that I love so much, that really captures the essence of what this is about. It's by Meister Eckhart, who says, if the only prayer you ever say your entire life is thank you, that would be enough. So gratitude is a form of prayer. Thank you. Thank you for this body. Thank you for this breath. Thank you for this life. Thank you for the sun that rises every morning. Thank you for the moon that shows up at night. I remember we did a retreat one time in Iceland, and it never got dark. The whole time we were there, it was just daylight. And after about 3 days of that, you really start to miss darkness. And you start to miss the moon. A lot of us love, the sun and being out all day. We love the summer. We're out playing. But the reality is if that was happening all the time, you would realize how much you miss the opposite of day and sun. So there's a lot to be grateful for. And when we're in that attitude of gratitude, we're in a state of benevolence. We're in a state of fullness. We're in a state of meaning and richness. That richness doesn't have to be through physical, materialistic things. Richness, the real richness, is the richness that arises from within you. And one of the best ways that we can be rich is to be grateful. The third niyama is known as Tapasya. Tapasya means purification. So the way that you can look at purification really is your ability to challenge yourself. A lot of us, we want to run away from challenges. We want to just be comfortable. And the older we get, the more comfortable we become. A lot of times people, after they graduate college, what happens? They put on a lot of weight. They stop growing. And the moment you stop growing is the moment you're dying. That the reason why we were all put on this planet is to grow. To grow through being challenged. And this explains why you and me and probably everybody that you know on a daily basis is facing challenges. Put yourself in situations that are challenging, that are confronting, that are intense, and watch yourself persevere through these challenges. And each time you step into that cave of challenge, you grow more. And as you grow more, you become more. And as you become more, then you can give more. The fourth niyama is known as self-study. And this kind of relates back to the growing thing. It's like, look, you're never going to be a master at everything. You're going to always be a beginner. And when we think we know it all, our cup is full, there's no room to take anything in. So in the Zen tradition, they call this the Zen beginner's mind. So there's always ways, and you guys do this when you listen to the Be Ultimate podcast, or you read a good book, or you go watch a documentary, or you go to a lecture, or you enroll in a yoga teacher training, or whatever it is. Each time that you do that, that's part of this self-study. And it feels good, right? Like it feels good to be learning. It feels good to be building up information, to be building up your knowledge system. So that's something we want to implement, hopefully on a daily basis. This is why I'm going to a retreat, in a few days. I'm going to go be a student. I want to grow. I want to learn. And right after that retreat's done, I'm going on a week-long retreat with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I'm going to go study with him. I'm a teacher, but as much as I'm a teacher, I'm also a student as well. Lastly, number 5 of the niyamas is known as Ishvara Pranidhana, which means celebration of the divine. The divine can be, for you, sacredness. It could be God or goddess. Could even be nature or the universe. It can be whatever it is that you want to call it, whatever resonates with you, but the recognition that there is a force that is much bigger and larger and greater and more magnificent than your own limited identity and your own little ego. Your ego is the small body of self, and Ishvara Pranidhana helps you to access the large body of self. Now, you can do this many different ways. Some people are going to do this by going out in nature, being in the mountains, going to the beach and gazing out across the ocean. And there's a lot of research that shows when you look at the ocean, you look at the blueness of the ocean, you look out at the horizon, you feel the vastness of life. And some people, this means going to church. Going to church and taking time out of your week to go celebrate God, go celebrate Jesus or Krishna or Buddha or Muhammad, whatever it is that resonates with you, to go to the temple. So there's many different ways that we can do this, but to find time in your life where you're connecting back to the sacred. Now, the third limb, after the yamas and the niyamas, is asana, or poses. And this is what typically we think about when we think about yoga. Originally, yoga had to do with the science of the mind. And then after about 3,500 years or so of yoga just being the science of the mind, yoga postures began to get created within the practices of yoga. And the pose in the beginning was really meant to help the yogi meditate more and to help the yogi have a higher quality of meditation. So we need to always remember that the pose is supposed to be in service of the meditation and the path of awakening, not the other way around. So Patanjali, he defines pose, which is known as asana, as really embodying 2 qualities. And the first quality is known as sthirya. And sthirya means steadiness. So when we do a posture, we want to do it steadily. So we're steady physically, as steady as we can be. and that we're also steady within our mind, as steady as we can be. And that we're steady as well within our breathing, that our breath isn't choppy or erratic. And then the other of the two qualities is known as Suka, and Suka means ease. I've also heard that it's translated at times into comfort and sweetness. So you're in a yoga position and you want to be steady, and you also want to be at ease. And if you're not, then technically it's not a yoga asana, it's not a yoga pose. Another definition of asana means to be seated quietly within. Now, a lot of the yoga postures, especially in modern yoga, are standing positions. So what does this mean, to be seated quietly within? Well, really, it's more of a metaphoric seat than it is a physical seat. So you're in a standing pose, but inside your mind it's as if you're taking a seat inside the throne of your mind, and you're just seated quietly. You're just watching and observing, not reacting, but always responding from that place of peacefulness, of ahimsa. So some poses are challenging and intense, and you don't like them, you might even hate them, you might despise them, you may never want to do them again. But even in those poses, to be quiet and to not be reactive. Because how are you going to do this in your life if you can't do it in a yoga position? So the posture and the pose is really the container. It comes back a little bit to the tapasya, the purification, challenging ourselves physically so that our bodies are strong. This temple is strong. And then this becomes the container for the magic to be able to flow through. Dr. Wayne Dyer said, your body is the garage where you park the soul. So when we do the poses, we're making sure that that garage is all set up so that then we can access those deeper levels and those deeper dimensions of who we are. The fourth limb of the 8 limbs of yoga is known as Pranayama. Pranayama, we could look at in more modern terms. What's really become popular recently is this idea of breath work. Breath work has gotten really, really popular these last few years. So prana, if you're unfamiliar, just means life force or vitality. It's energy, it's chi. It's what the ancient Egyptians call Ra, R-A. And the more energy we have, the more animated our experience of life becomes, the more heightened our senses become, the more data that we can take in, and the more likely that we are to pierce through that maya, that veil of illusion and separateness, to discover the true nature of reality beyond the Newtonian physics and into more of the quantum physics. And Yama means the expansion of, or the elongation of. So the word pranayama means the expansion of energy of life force. And we do that by working with our breath. And how many people don't even think about their breath normally? Unless they're about to die or they get punched in the stomach, then you think about your breath. But the yogis knew that working with the breath was one of the big gateways of moving through the science of true realization and awakening. And the yogis, they always would study nature. Like a lot of their revelations came from just observing animals, observing trees, observing the sky, observing all things in nature. And what they realized is that when they studied these animals, the animals that lived the longest were the animals that breathed the slowest. And then adversely, the animals that lived the shortest were the ones that breathed more rapidly. So they started to work with slowing down the breath. The average human being breathes about 15 breaths per minute. And the yogis, they were able to work their way where they were able to easily breathe 1 breath per minute. So they were slowing down their breath rate, and then that would have a positive effect on the heart. Basically, you're slowing down the breath rate, and your systems of your body, they just don't have to work as hard. So load and stress that's put on the body, it diminishes, and therefore longevity of life begins to expand. So a lot of these yogis, they were centenarians. They lived well past the age of 100 years. So when we do pranayama and we do this breath work, we're flooding the body, we're flooding our organs, our tissues, and our cells with vitality. And then also, when you shape your breath, you shape your mind. When your breath becomes agitated, your mind becomes agitated. And when your breath becomes steady, your mind becomes steady, that the breath and the mind are interdependent of each other. Moving on, still climbing that stairway to heaven. Now we are at limb number 5. Limb number 5 is known as pratyahara, which means sense withdrawal. So this limb is really about mastering the senses. And the first 4 limbs, they really have to do with things externally outside of us. And this limb of pratyahara is where we shift from the external world and we turn into this internal world. In the same way that NASA scientists might be responsible for exploring outer space, the yogis, their job was really the science of exploring the inner space. So you can look at your 5 senses. In yoga, they use the metaphor that the 5 senses are like 5 horses pulling a wagon or a chariot. And the wagon or the chariot is your body, and the charioteer, the person steering this chariot, this wagon, is your mind. The horses are the senses. Most people are dominated and enslaved to those 5 senses or 5 horses. When that's the case, bad things happen. When the horses are leading the way, bad things happen. You get pulled down into nasty ravines. You end up going down trails and paths that you never wanted to go down. And in some cases, you get taken off the cliff. This is what can happen when those 5 horses are leading the way. So we want to be able to master our 5 senses. Our senses may say, hey, let's eat a gallon of ice cream. Our 5 senses may say, hey, let's go eat a case of donuts or drink a 12-pack of beer or whatever it is, do the drug, And this is how a lot of people live their lives. They become weak and the 5 senses are leading the way. They're not happy. They're miserable. They're barely getting through life. And in some instances, lives are even getting ended prematurely simply because the 5 senses are running the show. So we want to be able to master these 5 senses, and we do this through practice. Remember, the things that you strengthen and that you feed and you work on and you flex and you exercise, like muscles, become stronger. So you want to strengthen your willpower and your ability to be in control of those senses. So you steering the chariot, you're the one that's determining where you're going to go and where you're going to move, what actions you're going to take. Now, I like to look at the 5 senses as well. Another way you can look at it is like the senses are like satellite dishes. And usually these satellite dishes are facing outward and they're picking up all the data that's coming in through the external world. So you're getting the visual representation, you're smelling, you're tasting, you're feeling, you're hearing, and all that's coming from the outer world. But in Pratyahara, what we do is we take those satellite dishes, instead of them being pointed outwardly, we turn those inwardly. And now we're able to pick up on data and information, insight, the voice of intuition, wisdom, the inner teacher, what's known as the inner guru. All that comes from the inner dimensions. And this is when we really begin to become free of the external world. It's not that we don't need to eat food and that we don't need to interact with people, but we become free in the sense that we realize everything that we ever wanted it already exists inside of us. All the abundance and the love and that richness and the beauty and the wisdom and the answers and the knowledge, it's right here within us. But we're never going to be able to tap into that with those five senses or satellite dishes pointed outward. We got to turn them in. So when I go on this meditation retreat in a few days, 14 days, pretty much all day, this is what you do. You're looking within, you're going within, and then you start to really awaken that there's this whole world, this whole magnificent world that exists within you. Marcus Aurelius said, people look for retreats for themselves in the country, by the coast, or in the hills, when it's possible for you to retreat into yourself anytime you want. So Pratyahara is about taking that retreat and going inwardly. And then this transgresses us naturally to the sixth limb, which is dharana. Dharana means focus or concentration. And you can look at focus and concentration when it's lacking is like a big flooded swamp. Our attention is scattered. Our ability to focus is spread out and diffused. And so things become very superficial. When we start to work with dharana and focus and concentration, this is like creating the banks of a river. And now instead of having this big flooded swamp, we have this flow of powerful, focused, singular energy moving in a strong direction. And now instead of things being superficial, they become deep and profound. So if we're going through our days and we're just always on our phone and we're looking at social media here and there, and it's like we're just going through the rat race of life, we're living this very surface level, superficial experience of life. There's no time for deep thinking. There's no time for solitude. So in yoga, the way that they work with dharana and focus and concentration is they pick an object to focus on. And this might be a mantra, or this might be looking at a picture, or this might be looking at a candle flame. And you just focus on that over and over and over again. In mindfulness meditation, we may focus on the breath or physical body sensation. Or we may observe thought or feelings or even sounds. All these things become an anchor, and we're focusing at that anchor. And then naturally what happens when dharana is weak is that we lose the focus, right? We start thinking about other things. We start ruminating on our past, or we start planning for the future, and we've lost the focus, which is okay. This is how you make it stronger. So the mind goes away. And then eventually we become aware that this has happened. And then we gently bring our attention back to the object that we're choosing to focus on. And the more we do that, the more we strengthen it, the more strong our focus becomes. Now eventually it becomes so strong where it's almost like a laser that we get so focused on that object that then we move to the seventh limb, which is dhyana. Dhyana is meditation. So the way that dhyana works is you're focusing on the object, and what happens is that you become so dialed into that object that you become one with it. So now you begin to transcend yourself. You move beyond yourself, and you also move beyond time, place, and space. So now there's no separation between you, the observer, and the object that you're focusing on. Those two become one and the same. And that's dhyana. So how do you know that you reach dhyana? You know when you sit down and you meditate and time goes by really, really fast, or way faster than you thought. Like you set your clock for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or whatever, and it feels like 2 minutes. Well, chances are you reach and access a dhyana. Maybe you fluctuated a little bit between the dharana and the dhyana, But overall, you're more in that dhyana, and that's the meditation, according to Patanjali and these 8 limbs of yoga. And then finally, the last limb, the 8th limb, is Samadhi. And Samadhi is the goal of all yoga. The goal of all yoga is to experience oneness. Not to think it, not to hear it on the Be Ultimate podcast, but to really, really experience oneness is what we're talking about. And this, Samadhi, is a continuation of the dhyana. So oneness is what Einstein labeled as the unified field, or the Taoists, they call it the Tao. And in modern day science, it's known as the quantum field. It's beyond the realm of, again, Newtonian physics. It's this subatomic field of energy that exists beyond time, place, and space. So when we achieve Samadhi, we become one with the universe. Our veil of separateness completely dissolves. There's no more Travis and his body and his mind and his thoughts. All that evaporates. It goes away. And the essence of who I am and you are, and that all life is, nature, animals, all of it, the source of it all is one and the same. And again, if you haven't experienced this could sound crazy and maybe even new agey. But I'm here to tell you that it's real and it exists. And if you move through these practices of yoga, you too can also experience it. So I like to look at enlightenment and awakening as when the wave realizes that it's the ocean. We're all waves. And we think that we're separate waves and that we're separate from the ocean, but we're not. The wave is part of the ocean. And so are we. We're all connected through this ocean of interdependence and connectedness. But the reality is that although on one level there is this field of oneness in the classical world of Newtonian physics, there's also the world of duality. And that's the great paradox of living life and of being a human being. So really both are true. On one level we're separate, and on one level we're connected. And our life is this dance between the two. As the philosopher Ram Dass says, at the same time you remember your Buddha nature, you also have to remember your social security number, right? Like we still have to function in this world. Or my teacher, Jack Kornfield, who wrote the famous book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. You become enlightened, you become awakened, you still got to do your laundry, you still got to pay your bills, you still got to function in the world. And that's the dance. So the Indian yogi sage Sri Nisargadatta said, wisdom says I'm nothing, love says I'm everything, and it's between these two that my life flows. So those are the 8 limbs of yoga. I hope you found that inspiring, awakening, motivating, or at the very least, just get you thinking. So now let's finish with the ultimate prayer. May we bring strength where there is weakness. May we bring courage where there is fear. May we bring compassion where there is suffering. And may we bring light where there is darkness. May we be ultimate.